Good morning. Can't really see you as well as I normally can see my students, so I'm going to assume that you're better dressed and happier to be here than they are at 10 in the morning on Thursday mornings, usually when I see them. So, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my work, which actually is taking place in Africa. But first, I'm going to take you sort of to the present and a little bit to the past, and then take you to the future. In the past month, as I was preparing this talk, I found myself repeatedly distracted by coverage of the migrant crisis in Europe. And part of this was actually just personal. When I look at these pictures, I actually see my own family. I'm Lebanese. The Syrians obviously are from the same region of the world. And, there, but for the grace of God, over, a little bit of different timing, that could have been my family. But when I saw this, I also see a professional connection too. And basically what I'm seeing is parallels between the present and what's happening with this migrant crisis and the work that I'm doing today, hopefully to ward off a potential crisis in the future. Maybe you've been asked at this point to contribute some money for food, for shelter, for blankets for the refugees, or maybe to lobby for a larger number of a larger quota for people to come here to this country. We should do these things. There's no reason not to. But really what we're doing in that case is treating the symptoms. We're not treating the cause. And hopefully with the work I'm doing, I'm treating the root causes and heading off a crisis like this before it happens in a different region in the world. That region is Africa. So let's talk a little bit about Africa. So right now in Africa, there's about 1.2 billion people. It's about 16% of the world's population. By 2050, the UN estimates that we'll have 2.5 billion people in Africa, 25% of the world's population. If you follow these numbers a little bit farther to 2100, you're expecting 4.5 billion people in Africa. It's a lot of people, and that's really fast population growth. And when you see growth like that, it raises serious questions. Will there be enough food for all these people? Is the public health infrastructure in place to take care of everybody? If something goes wrong, if and when something goes wrong, like a disease or like a natural disaster, a hurricane, an earthquake, a tornado, what happens? In countries that have strong governance and developed economies, there's a certain kind of resilience. They can withstand a crisis or a disaster without it developing into a full-blown crisis. But when you look at sub-Saharan Africa, you see very few countries that have strong governance and developed economies, which means that they're sort of teetering on the precipice. Something goes wrong and the whole system collapses. What can we do to stop that from happening? That's a fundamental question that we have. Maybe some of these conditions sound familiar to you. If you look at the recent history of the Middle East, I think they should, right? Explosive population growth, weak governance, underdeveloped economies. From the 1970s to the present, there was a population boom in the Middle East. In Egypt, the population more than doubled, from 40 to 85 million. In Syria, it tripled, 7 to 23 million. In Saudi Arabia, it quadrupled, from 7 to 29 million people. And what happened when all of these kids came of age at roughly the same time? Well, they woke up and they looked around, and many of them had even gotten educations, and then they discovered, there's nothing for me. There is no opportunity. There is no way for me to start my life. I can't move out of my parents' home. I can't start a family. I have no opportunity. And they looked and they thought, my government has failed me. And they went and they took to the streets. And you see this here in Egypt. The story of the Arab Spring is not over, and it's not clear that it's going to have a happy ending. Certainly, if we look just at Syria, hundreds of thousands of people have died, millions have been displaced. The country is literally in shambles. And in this sort of midst of this chaos, ISIS and other extremists are rising. And they're threatening moderates in the region, but they're also a threat to people around the world, people that aren't even directly a part of this conflict. What can we do to stop this from happening again? What leverage do we have to ward this off? Innovation in governance is really slow. You think about our institutions, they basically trace back hundreds of years at this point. We're not improving on them very quickly. If we learned nothing else in the last 15 years in the Middle East, we learned that we can't impose better governance from the outside. That hasn't worked. Economic development, it's also really hard. We've spent billions of dollars over decades sending aid around the world, and the results are at best mixed. So what's different today? What innovations do we have? What can we leverage? Well, I'm a communication professor. I'm telling you my story. So here's my answer for you. We have seen tremendous progress in information communication technology, and we can use that innovation to connect people around the world to global civil society and the global economy so that they can help themselves. And I'll tell you a little bit about my work. So, I work primarily in Uganda right now with an organization named Peripheral Vision International, and a little background on both. Uganda, it's a Central African state. It's had the same dictator for roughly 30 years, Museveni. It's relatively safe, it's relatively stable, but it's certainly not achieving its full potential. More than 50 languages are spoken there. The actual national lingua franca is actually English. It's a vestige of British colonial rule. Median age in Uganda is 15.5, which means the population is doubling every 15 years. 90% of households don't have electricity. The GDP per capita is about $650. So that's kind of the situation on the ground. Peripheral Vision International, PVI, is an organization that's based in New York and Kampala, Uganda, and it works broadly in East Africa. And its mission is basically to help facilitate communication among different groups, hard-to-reach populations, with NGOs from around the world, but also local grassroots organizations. My work with them is to help facilitate the creation of innovative, informative, and engaging content specifically made for Ugandans. Now, you might be asking, how does mass communication work in a country where 90% of households don't have electricity, GDP per capita is $650 a year, and most of the population lives a rural, agrarian, sustenance-level lifestyle? Like, how exactly does mass communication work? It's a good question, and that's a big part of our challenge. So I'm going to start by explaining distribution to you. So how do we find an audience for a message in a place like Uganda? Well, we take the message to the audience on the back of a motorcycle. We call this the Kabanda Boda, which basically translates to cinema bike. We have a fleet of these. We can send these out around Kampala, which is rapidly urbanizing. Anywhere there's an event going on, where there's a crowd gathering, we can have a message on display. We take the message to people over mobile phones. Now, Ugandans don't have smartphones yet, but what they do have are those old Nokia phones that you recycled 10 years ago. They went somewhere. They went to Africa. Public health researchers are using these for text messaging. We think we can do more with them, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. We take the message to them in bars, in salons, in video halls. Anywhere there's a screen, we take the message to the audience. A lot of life in Uganda is still lived in public. Unlike here, people don't cocoon in their own homes. So they're out in the streets, they're out interacting, and often there's an ambient screen. Wherever there's a group of people, we want our message to be there. And so we have a team of 10 full-time employees whose sole job is to fan out through the country and distribute physical copies of our media for free to people with screens. So we're seeding them, we're incentivizing or subsidizing these businesses to play our content. You see two of our stringers here in the slide in front of you. If you add this up, we take the message to the air, we take it to satellites, we put it on the internet, we saturate the entire country with physical media. Any way we can, we get the message out there. Your next question is probably, like, what's the message? Why are you trying so hard to find an audience in Uganda? Well, we cover all kinds of progressive causes, whether it's family planning, government transparency, Ebola safety and prevention, women's rights, disability rights, you name it. We are creating content with partners and on our own for audiences all throughout the country, different age groups, different genders, different education levels. The second thing to keep in mind about our content is that once it goes out there into the world, it has to stand on its own. The country is immersed in pirated content from around the world. So the entertainment from Hollywood, from Bollywood, and from Nollywood, which is Nigeria's entertainment hub, is on the shelf side by side with our stuff. So we have to be informative, but we also have to be entertaining because people have to choose to watch our content. Otherwise, it's for naught. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about two projects so you can kind of see how the content and the distribution work hand in hand. So the first project here is actually brand new and just out in the field right now, and it's called Wanji Games.
Kisuku community Joabolia, Wanji Games. Welcome to Wanji Games, where you are part of the story. You have 4 free plays. Please listen carefully. As you play, you will be asked to make choices. Each choice leads to a different outcome. When you play again, make different choices to hear a different story.
Okay, so what you're hearing is actually the merger of 2 technologies that you know, but that you either don't like or you've forgotten about. First is the dumb phone. You see one of them in the flyer on the left there. Like I said, people all throughout the country have these dumb phones. They may not have any other form of mass communication. They may be completely isolated in a rural location, but they have these phones in their pocket. Often, these are people who are really bored. Like, there are people living on a farm, hours from any city of consequence. There is no content created for them in their native language. There is no access to a television or even a radio necessarily. But they have this phone. So we have potentially a link right to them, right to their hands, to their ears. The second technology is interactive phone trees. Everybody loves them. This is what you press 1, press 2, press 3 when you call Comcast before you get put on hold. So we are taking these 2 technologies, which are old by our standards, but new for Uganda, and old by our standards, so cheap even by our standards, and we're merging them together with a format that you may have been familiar with when you were a kid, a choose-your-own-adventure game. So you see flyers here on the screen for 2 of them. One is a farming and saving and investment game. The other is a story about time traveling, science fiction set in Uganda that also weaves in messages about ideal family size and the relationship between family size and prosperity and wealth. People can call in these games, they make their different choices, and they have cause and effect consequences, right? You choose one thing and your game ends, so you call back again and you go for a different way. As you go through this, hopefully there's a little bit of learning that occurs, but also you're participating in a form of immersive entertainment that really is in competition with no other entertainment. I can't tell you much about the effects here because literally it went to the field about 6 weeks ago. But what I can tell you is that we went out to one state outside of Kampala in sort of a rural area. We went to community centers in this state. We put up a few posters, we passed out a few flyers, and over the course of a few days, we got thousands of calls, literally thousands. So these are people that are choosing to play an immersive game. We think we can weave in informative educational content, and we're going to be pursuing this more in the course of the next year. The second project, I can give you a little bit more information on. So these are screen caps from a rap news television program that we produce that's been on the air now for 2 years in Uganda. So, like I said, median population is 15.5. You have to figure out a way to connect young people to news and information. Otherwise, the next generation is going to be totally unengaged. So, rap news, it's broadcast on a national television network and also over satellite, also, of course, posted to the internet in both English and in Luganda, the local major language in Kampala. And we cover all kinds of things on this program: national, international, sports, entertainment, government affairs, you name it. But one of the things that we've made a special effort to cover over the past couple years is stories about corruption. Corruption is a major problem in sub-Saharan Africa. It thwarts progress in all kinds of different domains. We can't talk about corruption in a country where there's a dictator. So what we can talk about is international examples of corruption. And so what you're going to see here is not just a story about an international example of corruption, but coverage of punishment of that corruption around the world. And I brought a clip for you so you can actually see it yourself.
The fight against corruption is never easy. Some say it never will be, and it has never been. Corruption is like a ball of snow. It starts rolling and then continues to grow.
All around the world, this problem still remains. The abuse of power is keeping people in chains. But lately, some signs of hope have made the headlines of corrupt officials being handed heavy fines.
In America, they even busted a governor. Bob McDonnell got sentenced to 2 years in prison for accepting bribes and taking part in corruption.
His lawyers asked the judge to be kind and grant bail, but the judge said no and let that ship sail because a price must be paid, and he sent the governor to jail.
The same happened in Hong Kong when a wealthy man tried to bribe an official, and all he got was a big corruption scandal.
7 men were also incarcerated, including the second most powerful man in real estate.
Putting corrupt leaders in prison is the way to put corruption out of fashion, as we've seen in these important examples.
So on this one, I can give you a little information on evaluation. And what I can say is that experimental research shows that audiences that watch these stories about international corruption leave thinking more about domestic corruption. And it changes how they evaluate their leaders, which we hope over time will actually lead to a culture of maybe more accountability, different social norms around corruption. Every now and then you're going to see a story like this about a kid from Somaliland or Uganda that makes it to Harvard, and it's heartwarming. You have to feel good when this happens. This was just in September, I think, this year. But we can't pin all our hopes on these outliers. The potential of an entire continent of welders, of tailors, of potential mathematicians is accessible to us from our hands today, from our smartphones. And this is different. This is new. This is the power of communication, and it's a power that's available not just to me, but actually to all of us. When I was in Uganda in June, I took these pictures, and they're within about 30 minutes of each other. So the first thing you see is this incredible beauty, just wonderful natural environment, tremendous potential. Even on the border of Kenya, hours from a community of any size or consequence, people are living in mud brick homes. They have mobile phones. They have mass communication. If you look at the picture on the right, you'll see there are actually cell towers poking up there. We have an opportunity to reach people around the world. We have an opportunity to engage these people in conversation, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to share our ideas from the US to Uganda, from Uganda back to the US. Anywhere that there are people and ideas and opportunity, we want to join in a conversation. So these are some of my partners in this conversation. It's Survivor, MC Loy, who's 13, and Lady Slike. I'm guessing that somewhere, somehow in your life, there's actually a partner around the world that you could communicate with too. And in doing so, you might be able to extend opportunities such that no matter where you are in the world, the next generation will be able to tap into the opportunities that we have sitting in this room. Thank you.